Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And in our ongoing series on Medal of Honor winners, tonight we're going to talk about Lieutenant Colonel Charles Kettles, who died recently at the age of 89. Lieutenant Colonel Kettles was awarded his Medal of Honor in July of 2016 for his bravery during service in May of 1967, during the height of the Vietnam War. And if that sounds a little unusual, it is. The traditional rule is that the Medal of Honor is awarded within 5 years of the specific act of bravery that merited it. And in Lieutenant Colonel Kettle's case, he originally received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions. However, the award was upgraded to the Medal of Honor in 2016 after a campaign to recognize his actions that included letters from his company comrades validating his actions and a specific act of Congress to waive the time limit. Lieutenant Colonel Kettles, then Major Kettles, was part of the 176th Assault Helicopter Company, and he flew Hueys, were the UH-1 specially designed helicopters that were introduced in the Vietnam War. They were introduced large-scale during the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley in 1965, which we've talked about before in our Hal Moore podcast. I refer you to that. The Huey was originally designed as a troop transport and evacuation helicopter, but it soon became a gunship as well. Although in Major Kettle's case, he was awarded the medal by piloting the Huey as an evacuation helicopter for the 101st Airborne Division along the Song Tra Cau riverbed in Vietnam's Duc Pho district on the eastern coast of South Vietnam. His 4 flights into a hot landing zone saved 44 men, including 4 of his own men, all of whom certainly would have died because they were essentially exposed against hundreds of embedded NVA troops. Major Kettles would have died also because his helicopter was exposed to fire, especially on the 3rd and 4th flights in. And on the 4th flight, by picking up the last 8 men, he went way overweight, and despite the fact there were no other targets and the NVA were firing, he managed to maneuver his helicopter to safety. Major Kettles' Medal of Honor citation at the Medal of Honor website reads as follows. Charles S. Kettles, rank Major, Company 176th Assault Helicopter Company, date of issue July 18, 2016, place date near Duc Pho, Republic of Vietnam, May 15, 1967. On May 15, 1967, Major Kettles, upon learning that an airborne infantry unit had suffered casualties during an intense firefight with the enemy, immediately volunteered to lead a flight of 6 UH-1D helicopters to carry reinforcements to the embattled force and to evacuate wounded personnel. Enemy small arms, automatic weapons, and mortar fire raked the landing zone, inflicting heavy damage to the helicopters. However, Major Kettles refused to depart until all helicopters were loaded to capacity. He then returned to the battlefield with full knowledge of the intense enemy fire awaiting his arrival to bring more reinforcements, landing in the midst of enemy mortar and automatic weapons fire that seriously wounded his gunner and severely damaged his aircraft. Upon departing, Major Kettles was advised by another helicopter crew that he had fuel streaming out of his aircraft. Despite the risk posed by the leaking fuel, he nursed the damaged aircraft back to base. Later that day, the infantry battalion commander requested immediate emergency extraction of the remaining 40 troops, including 4 members of Major Kettles' unit who were stranded when their helicopter was destroyed by enemy fire. With only 1 flyable UH-1 helicopter remaining, Major Kettles volunteered to return to the deadly landing zone for a 3rd time, leading a flight of 6 evacuation helicopters, 5 of which were from the 161st Aviation Company. During the extraction, Major Kettles was informed by the last helicopter that all personnel were on board and departed the landing zone accordingly. Army gunships supporting the evacuation also departed the area. Once airborne, Major Kettles was advised that 8 troops had been unable to reach the evacuation helicopters due to the intense enemy fire. With complete disregard for his own safety, Major Kettles passed the lead to another helicopter and returned to the landing zone to rescue the remaining troops. Without gunship, artillery, or tactical Air Force support, the enemy concentrated all firepower on his lone aircraft, which was immediately damaged by a mortar round that shattered both front windshields and the chin bubble and was further raked by small arms and machine gun fire. Despite the intense enemy fire, Major Kettles maintained control of the aircraft and situation, allowing time for the remaining 8 soldiers to board the aircraft. In spite of the severe damage to his helicopter, Major Kettles once more skillfully guided his heavily damaged aircraft to safety. Without his courageous actions and superior flying skills, the last group of soldiers and his crew would never have made it off the battlefield. Major Kettles' selfless acts of repeated valor and determination are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Army. Here, late in life, Major Kettles describes what happened that day.
The mission started about 1000 hours on the 15th. The enemy was pretty well known. We put a total of about 160 ground troops using 8 helicopters and 4 trips in, with about 40 ground troops were overwhelmed, which is the reason that we had to go in third and the fourth time. Third and the fourth time, we evacuated those who had been wounded, dead, and whatever else, and was the reason for the reinforcements going in there. So a total of about 160 troops were inserted, and throughout the day, the wounded were evacuated. But the bulk of them came out in the third and fourth trip. Late in the afternoon, the battalion commander called for emergency extraction of the remaining 44 troops. We, in the 176th Assault Helicopter Company, were down to where we only had 1 helicopter headed out through the valley, and I had only 1 troop in the back of my helicopter. Where the distribution of the rest of them, I had no idea where they were, and didn't make any difference as long as we had them all. Command and control helicopter said there are 8 men still in the LZ who didn't get on board a helicopter. So I told them I would go back and pick them up. I had only 1 on board. When I got a beam the landing zone again, I would simply break off and go back in to get the 8 that were there, knowing full well that I'm going to be over gross weight, but there was no option. So I racked it up into a steep left descending turn, 180 degrees, to get as close as I could to them. And they had been down in the riverbed with a last-ditch effort to defend while the ground and the rest of the ground troops were loaded on the earlier departure. Shortly after we landed, I got a mortar round that went off the nose of it because the enemy had just 1 single helicopter to deal with, and they could train everything toward it. The mortar round took out the chin bubble in front of me and part of the left and right windshield and did other damage. However, the emergency panel was still cold, no red lights. I turned the aircraft back over to Ray Seacrest, who was in the right seat, co-pilot. When the crew chief indicated that all the troops were on board, I gave him a thumbs up and let's go.
Here's a speech by Secretary of War Eric Fanning inducting Lieutenant Colonel Kettles into the Hall of Heroes in 2016.
Good morning, Secretary Carter, General Allen, senior leaders of the department, civilian and military, Medal of Honor recipients, and especially Lieutenant Colonel Kettles, his family and friends. It's an honor to be with you. Our admiration for Lieutenant Colonel Kettles comes from his acts of heroism, but also from his quiet professionalism. From how on the day of his greatest testing, just as with all other days, he embodied the Army's values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. But I need to be honest up front. Behind my appreciation for Lieutenant Colonel Kettles, there's also some home state pride. He's a fellow Michigander. If you grow up in Michigan, chances are you've spent some time with machines. For Chuck Kettles, that meant a love affair with engines and aviation from the very start of his life. From his education at Edison Institute in Dearborn, where he practiced on a flight simulator, to his work with cars and engines at his Ford dealership, we see some of what prepared him to be an Army aviator. The Huey that Chuck flew was a pioneering machine at the time, but he knew instinctively how to get the most out of it. So while the deeds we honor today were the product of great courage and valor, they had their roots in what he learned growing up in Michigan. Chuck was highly skilled and well prepared to fly into danger, but what he achieved on May 15, 1967, was not predestined. His heroic actions were the result of individual decisions he made on that day and every day he served as an Army officer. From the very day he volunteered to serve in Vietnam. Ultimately, it was because Chuck decided, not once, not 2 or 3 times, but on 4 separate occasions, to fly directly into enemy fire, that 44 American lives survived. Each time, he knew it would be more dangerous, yet each time, he made the same decision. Chuck had never met most of the soldiers he was rescuing. He had no idea about their backgrounds, their race, who they loved, or where they went to pray. All he knew was that they were his fellow soldiers, that they were fellow Americans. At the back of his mind, he must also have understood that for these young men to see their parents again, to embrace their loved ones again, to serve their country again, it all depended upon him and his crew, and the decisions he would make that day. A couple of months ago, Chuck went out to dinner when a man approached him. He pointed to a table where his children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, 14 people in all, had gathered. And he said to Chuck, "You see those folks over there? It's all your fault." It was an extended family of one of the dozens of men Chuck and his crew had rescued. Over the past 2 days, the President, the Department of Defense, and the Army have celebrated Chuck's heroic actions. But we still have no way to appreciate them in their totality, because we have no way to calculate the contributions of those Chuck rescued, of the families they raised, or all of the people they inspired. We do know, however, that many of the soldiers Chuck served alongside endured a painful homecoming. For some, their service was little regarded. For others, they were shunned by friends and loved ones because of it. Their experience should weigh on all of us, and it must never be repeated. In the United States, we pride ourselves on the free exchange of ideas, and robust debate about our nation's security is essential. But we must not conflate our views of war with our views of our warfighters. As President Obama has said, we must show all who have worn the uniform the respect and dignity they deserve. In learning about this heroic soldier from Ypsilanti, we've seen patience, humility, and duty redefined. In hearing the stories of many of his brothers, members of the team to which he was so devoted, we've seen what we value most as an Army. For his part, Chuck describes his deeds humbly. He volunteered for Vietnam, he has said, because there was a need and I had the skills. He felt a duty to contribute because it was the right thing to do. Long after he left Vietnam, he's carried those commitments forward. The technical skills that helped save so many lives in Vietnam, he shared with generations of students in Michigan. To this day, he visits local high schools to answer questions about a war those students never knew. Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Kettles was the consummate Army officer, but across his life, he's also served as the best kind of teacher, one who instructs through his actions, through his patience, and his humble example. Yesterday and today, we've had the chance to bestow a long overdue honor, but we've also had the opportunity to recall some overdue lessons as a country. We've had the chance to put the courage and valor of Chuck Kettles at the center of how we understand our history, our country, and the citizens who serve it so proudly. For that, and so much more, Lieutenant Colonel Kettles, you have our deepest admiration as an Army. You have our deepest appreciation as a nation. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. To you, Lieutenant Colonel Kettles, our gratitude is unlimited. We cannot begin to repay the debt we owe you.
Of greatest importance is the fact that the names of those 44 do not appear on the wall in Washington, D.C. That's the bottom line, and that's what matters. I didn't do it by myself. There were some 74 pilots and crew members involved in this whole mission that day. So it's not just me. I'm just leading the pack, making the decisions, which some of them may not have liked them. I don't know. But those behind me were obliged to follow. And they did. They did their job above and beyond. So the medal is not mine. It's theirs.